I was working a lot. It was common for me to work like 60, 70, 80 hours. I don't even know what it was anymore, right? But something that really mattered to me, I thought it was very important and it didn't work. And I think this is always the moment, right? This is the moment where your brain kind of snaps. And the next day I went to work. I sat down, I opened my laptop. What am I doing here? Like, what do I usually do at work? So it was very scary. I felt like I really couldn't reach the content in my brain and I really drew a blank. So I just kind of got up and walked out of the office without saying anything and I just went home.
That's my guest today, Dr. Elsa van der Berg. She's a former head of product turned solopreneur. She spent about 10 years in product leadership and strategy roles in the Berlin tech startup scene. And today she works as an interim product leader, as an advisor, and as a coach for B2B SaaS businesses. My conversation with Elsa blew me away. We talked about all kinds of interesting stuff. She shared really her career journey into tech, which initially started in the legal space. And she talks about how she fell into and fell in love with product management. But really my favorite parts were hearing about how she's navigated and really survived some of the challenges that come when you work at early stage tech companies. Shared a few really interesting stories from her journey, from working 70-hour weeks that was earning her lots of praise and kudos to having this massive burnout moment. She talked about how startup culture trained her to over prepare and the feedback that she received that kind of helped her unlearn some old bad habits. And she talked about what happens when too much of your identity gets tied up into your job, which is something I personally struggle with, and how to break the cycle. If you're new here, I'm Andrew, and this is what this show is all about. I sit down with leaders who work across marketing, product, and growth teams to unpack some of the toughest moments in their careers and explore the frameworks they use to survive them. It's enough from me. Let's go ahead and get into the conversation with Elsa.
So I'm from a very small village in the Netherlands. It's in the north of the Netherlands. I think when I was living there, it was about 500 inhabitants, like really small, right? And
really small.
Very
wow.
small. The nearest city was 12 kilometers away. That's where I went to school. So I rode my bike 12 kilometers to school. But I lived in this village, which has pros and cons, I think, growing up in a village, right? I'm raising my kids in the big city or in a relatively big city in Berlin, Germany. And a lot of people say, oh, you should raise your kids in the countryside because it's better for kids. For me, it was great when I was a little kid. And then at some point, I didn't love it as much. I really wanted to get out. So I moved first to a city in the Netherlands and then to Berlin in Germany when I was 21.
And so what were you into as a child? Like if we could go back and talk to your friends in high school. Actually, what's the appropriate way to say high school in the Netherlands? What do they call it?
Middelbare school.
All right. So if we were to go back and we were to talk to your friends from middelbare school, how would they describe you? Like what were you into? Were you always entrepreneurial? I don't know if there's like paper routes or anything like that in a village like that. Like what were you into? What were your first couple jobs? Like take us back in time a little bit.
So I was really into arts and I was really into acting. My dream was to become an actress, which I think I'm kind of getting that out of doing these videos for LinkedIn. Like I really enjoy doing it and I really enjoy public speaking. So I think I get a little bit of that performative side out there.
I'm always curious for this show if there are things that are just who we are, that are just built into our DNA versus experiences that kind of shape us or people that shape us. And that's sort of like a theme or an undercurrent of the show that I'm always learning about.
I think another thing about me is that I'm ridiculously confident somehow, even though I was weird, but I've always been quite confident. So you asked about the entrepreneurial thing. I remember when I was like 11, I at some point had this plan of building a house. I have it all worked out in my head and I had all these plans. I wanted to also run a magazine. I wanted to start a magazine and start a shop at the age of 11, 12. And I couldn't comprehend what would be blocking me from doing that at that age.
And so what were your first couple of jobs?
So real jobs, I think like 15, 16, I was working in supermarkets. At that age, you weren't even allowed to sit at the checkout yet. So my job was, we called it, I think, balancing. So you had to go down the racks of the shelves and basically move the food forward.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I don't know if you have that, but like, because if people get a lot of food, it doesn't look full anymore. So you have to just move the food forward. So it's like very manual. I did that.
In the US, we call that facing the shelves. One of my first jobs was at a drugstore and you had to face the shelves. That was like before you could be a clerk or checking folks out. Yeah, literally that, pulling stuff up, making it look tidy, all that kind of stuff.
I faced shelves and then I got to sit at checkout. It was like a step up. And I worked at campsites as kids entertainment, which meant I got to perform, right? And engage kids and explain things, stuff I like.
And so what did you think you were going to do for a career? So obviously you said, you were very into acting. You wanted to grow up and become an actress. Was that something that you brought with you? I don't know if you went to university or not, but is that something that you brought with you into your young adulthood?
I actually tried out for theater school at the age of 18 and got turned down. And then I really struggled a lot to think about what I should study, because then I had to pick what to study. And it was this really big decision because I felt like this is it, right? The thing that I choose now that's going to determine everything, and there will be no turning back. It's like a one-way door decision, and that's it. So, and now I realize it isn't, right? There's so many people who change careers, and they are so interesting, and they bring so much with them. It's so powerful, right? But I thought this is it. And then I thought really about security. So I was like, okay, what's going to give me money for sure? Because I really like this idea of having financial security. So I picked law, very surprisingly, and actually really enjoyed law as well. And I learned that I very much enjoy reading large amounts of text, like reading a lot. I can read very fast, and being able to draw the most important conclusions from it. I think I also had that in me, but studying law helped sharpen it. And I absolutely use that every day, right? I think it's like one of my powers. I hate that word, but it's something I'm good at that other people find hard.
Yeah, I was thinking there's so many parallels to probably what you do today in your day-to-day, analyzing these large data sets, mix of quantitative and a lot of qualitative, looking for patterns, making stories from the patterns. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and picking out what matters, because I notice as I coach a lot of people, and then they pick out some stuff, even AI, right? It picks out some stuff, and I'm like, right? But that's not it, right? And for me, that comes very natural through practice and through, I think, talents, or like it's something that I'm just naturally not bad at. I'm terrible at some things that are really easy for people, and I'm really good at stuff that are really hard for other people. I can't drive a car, for example. Don't know how to do that.
Still, you don't know how to drive at all?
Nope. I have a driving license, but I don't know how to drive.
Well, that makes sense. While you're in the city, you can walk around. And so you're into law and university. What are the first, how do you get from that version of you to the version who I've gotten to meet, who's gotten into SaaS and PLG and product management, and user research and all this stuff? Help us to understand maybe the first two steps in that direction. Yeah.
So I decided after my master's, I decided to do a PhD in law, which I completed, hence the doctor. But I did not get a scholarship for it. I just really wanted to do it. I was determined. So I had to make money while I was doing my PhD. I liked writing, right? I still love writing. I write content because I love it. And it helps me, but I love it in the first place. So I decided to do a PhD in law on torture, actually, or the right not to be tortured, but needed money. And at some point, a friend of mine was working at this startup called Pay11, which is now SumUp. And she said, hey, they need Dutch people to answer phones in customer care. Student job, 2 days a week. Amazing. And so I went there. This was 2011, no, maybe 2012. And started working there, loved it. It was really a startup, right? And this was my first time working in a startup. Before that, I had worked at public prosecution, and it was so boring. The work was so boring. Working there, I was just constantly checking the clock of like how much longer, and trying to build in breaks for myself to kind of survive this day, because it was just like a huge caseload and no deadlines, no pressure. Nothing changes, just working through caseload. And it was not for me at all. Then I started working in the startup, and I really enjoyed it, right? The problem solving. So I really enjoyed customer care. And then I kind of grew within Pay11, within that startup. So I went from taking multiple teams, then managing country teams, then going into operations, and in the end, going into product within that company.
This episode of the show is presented by my friends at ThriveStack. They're making it super easy for growth teams to track their entire growth model in one place. And if you work at a SaaS company, you know how hard that is. I always wanted to see what was going on across the whole model, from awareness through acquisition and activation, through to retention, conversion, expansion, and upsell. I always wanted to have access to it in one place, but it was nearly impossible. Everything was siloed and disjointed, and I had to work with the BI engineers to consolidate like 8 different data sources into one place. The process was slow, it was inflexible, and to make a small change, I needed to create another ticket, which got added to the backlog. That's why I'm so excited to be partnering with ThriveStack. They're an analytics platform specifically designed for growth teams. They combine all those disjointed data sources into one single view of the customer journey. They automatically flag the drop-offs, friction points, and leaks, and they have built-in alerting thresholds so you can avoid those, hey, what happened to this random metric last week, Slack messages that I used to drive me crazy from my execs. They're specifically made for growth teams. They have a very generous free plan, and I've had the chance to take a peek under the hood at what they're building and what's on their roadmap, and I'm so impressed. Check them out for yourself at ThriveStack.ai. Once again, that is ThriveStack.ai. At the beginning, is there this thought that's like, yeah, I'll do this for some period of time, and then I probably got to get back to law. Like I'm in school, I'm graduating from school, I'm pursuing this, I'm pursuing higher levels of education in this. So I'm curious to know, like, is that an intention? And then when does that intention change where you realize like, hey, I'm actually going to go and pursue this other thing that my heart's telling me to do?
Yeah. So for me, it was, I finished my PhD and then I figured, okay, now I'll switch back to the human rights law thing because that's what I set out to do. And I wanted to make a real difference. I wanted to do something real for humanity and I wanted to be a human rights lawyer. That was the whole point of everything. And then I went to apply to a couple of institutes and NGOs and said, like, here's my PhD. It's on torture. And there was like anti-torture NGOs and all of them turned me down.
Wow. Why?
Because I did not have several unpaid internships under my belt. Because they require that. They said, you never interned at the UN, you never interned here. It's like, no, I was making money. Like I needed to pay my rent. And that was an issue. And wow. I didn't do many interviews, but after like a couple, I was like, honestly, I love the startup scene. They have embraced me. Like they really embraced me because they gave me all of these opportunities. There was so much growth for me, like open doors and open arms. And I felt the absolute opposite on the other side. So it's like, you know what, I'm just going to keep doing this because it's going very well for me and I'm enjoying it.
Cool. And so is there a moment somewhere along the lines where you realize this skill set that I've been building that's been helpful to, for me to study and learn more about law and all the different casework and all that stuff? Is there a moment where you realize like, hey, actually this is pretty applicable to this other stuff that I'm doing that's totally different, but a similar skill set?
Yes. I think in the end, why I'm good at law or the parts of me that make me good at law are the same parts that make me good at this other stuff, right? Like what I just mentioned, being able to consume large amounts of data and pick out what matters, or logical reasoning, or being critical about your own reasoning, being explicit about your own thinking, right? Like law is much more kind of semantics, or at least German law. It's like if it follows this kind of structure, then this tends to be the output. But it's also an ill-structured problem, right? There is not one right answer. The same in product management. It's not like if you follow the framework and you do step 1 and step 2, then out comes the correct output, right? It's not like that. There's different ways to frame things. So that's all exactly the same. In the beginning, a lot of people wanted to hire me for legal startups because they were like, it's the law. And it sounds like, but I don't need that overlap, right? So there's already so much overlap in just the skill set that you need, at least for me.
All right, I got to ask the question that's in the back of my mind here. What did your parents think? So you're going to school, you're getting your PhD in law, which I feel like for whatever reason is like a very noble thing to pursue a higher level degree in. And then you're doing this startup thing, which is like so risky and like...
It's more that nobody knows what it is.
Right.
Nobody understands tech. Like people who aren't in tech don't know what tech is, right? Like my boyfriend's an architect and most of his friends are architects. And then when I come in, they're like, software? Like it's this very fluffy, weird concept. And when I try to go like, well, B2B SaaS, startups and scale-ups, it's like mumble jumble to most people that aren't in this. My parents, this was quite funny. At some point, my mom, you wanted stories. My mom told me she bumped into, she's never going to watch this, it's fine. She bumped into the mother of a high school friend of mine, and she was like, yeah, your high school friend, she's now at the hospital and she's curing pancreatic cancer. It's really great. And then her mother asked me what you were up to. And I said, well, Elsa is off in Berlin doing her own thing. Thanks, Mom.
It's so funny. So I had a college roommate, dropped out of university. We lived together our first 2 years, and then he was always a creative at heart, very into the outdoors, very into snowboarding and rock climbing. So he dropped out of university, moved across the country to Lake Tahoe, which is kind of on the border of Nevada and California. And he became like basically the head snowboard instructor and head ropes course instructor at a place that breeds Olympians and does all this amazing stuff. So he and I keep in touch. I look at what he's doing. I'm so jealous, right? He's pursued his dreams. He's made a career out of it. I bumped into his mom one day because we were from the same town. I bumped into his mom and she was like, "Oh, Andrew, you've got a real job. You're doing so great. And my son is, he's over there. He's doing his thing. He's snowboarding." And I was like, no, I think you got it backwards. He's living the dream. I'm like doing what I got to do. And so it's always funny how that is, right? The grass is always greener.
Yeah, exactly. But I think also like as grown adults, we should, at least as said, I have a lot of confidence, right? So it doesn't really dent anything for me.
All right. So, I want to double click on some of these tough moments along the way and the learnings and the lessons and some of that. So let's start with a tough career decision. What's like one of the harder career decisions that you've had to make? And I'm curious to know, like, if there's ever been a time where you felt like you were in over your head or you weren't sure what to do. What comes to mind for you as I ask that?
So the first thing that comes to mind is leaving a job that I really liked still. For example, this first job, I really loved it. And also it was my first job, so I couldn't imagine a life without that job. Also that job kind of swallowed me whole because I was just so excited about being part of a startup. I was working like 60, 70 hours a week. I was so into it. All of my colleagues became my best friends. It was my whole life. It was my whole world. And at some point after like 3.5 years, I felt like I had plateaued. I felt like I was just caught in this hamster wheel, kind of doing the same stuff over and over and making a lot of mistakes and being very frustrated with just everything around. And I felt like it's time to leave, but it's hard because it's all I ever knew. And I was also so comfortable there, right? Like I at some point described it as it's like this crazy rocket ship, but I'm one of the few people who knows exactly how to drive it. And it feels really good to be that person. But it might also mean that it's time to fuck off, right? So that's kind of what I thought. But that was very hard to make that decision.
And so how did you know? Like, this is one of those things I'm always curious about because it's so hard to know. I feel like a lot of times in the moment, should I leave? Should I stay? Did I stay too long? Is the learning, is the ceiling for me high enough here that it makes sense? So for you, how did you know when it was time to go? Like, was there a specific moment or day or thought or project, or more just something that was a slow building inside of you?
So you never know, right? Like I didn't know. At some point you just go with an instinct, I think. Like I'm actually a very gut feel kind of person. For somebody who talks about evidence-based product management, I'm a lot about the gut feel. Like my gut is often right about these kinds of things. And I think that also depends on how you're wired. Again, like I'm wired as somebody who takes risks quite easily. I'm not too nervous about landing on my feet. So I think it was probably growing over time. There must have been a specific moment, right? There's usually some catalyst, but I might not even be aware of it, what it was exactly. I think it's like, like a growing feeling, a sensation of, I should get out, and then one or two things that kind of push you over the edge. But I don't know exactly what it was.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode of the show. If you are, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening on. The data shows something like 40% of the people who listen to the show are actually subscribed. It is the best way for you to support the show, and it helps the algorithm find other listeners who are just like you. If you're feeling generous, a quick rating or review makes a huge difference as well. Thank you so much for listening and for your support. Now let's get back to this episode. Did you have ambitions of climbing up the totem pole? And like, was this a job where you felt like, hey, I've kind of climbed to the top of the totem pole for this place and it makes sense for me to spread my wings somewhere else? Like, did you have a vision for where you wanted to go and what you wanted to do?
So I've always been told I should have more of a strategic vision for my career. This is also what I would tell coachees, but I myself am really bad at having a strategic vision for my career because I'm quite gut feely. So for me, it was not about climbing the ladder. It's more about, am I happy? Right? I don't have to be super happy all the time, right? Not every day has to be joy, but overall, do I feel, does this bring me, what does this give me still, right? Like, because I'm somebody, I have high demands for my work. Very, very high demands. I want to feel passionate about it. I want to feel excited. I want to feel like I'm learning, like I'm growing. These are high demands, and that kind of causes me to have to shift sometimes, right? And also I fit definitely better in smaller organizations. I found that, like up to about 300 people. I'm just happier navigating that. Of course, 300 people is just some random firmographic, but you know what I mean? And when it grows beyond that, somehow you lose the connections, or I don't know what it is. So I tend to move on. Yeah, but it's not really about, do I have that title? It's never really been that strategic for me.
And so for folks who are listening to this, there's a ton of people right now who I feel like want to move, who have like stayed 2 years longer than they planned to because the job market has slowed down, who are unhappy, who are constantly trying to figure out, what should I do? Should I leave and like take a a gap in between this and my next gig? What would be your advice to someone listening to this who's been in a gig, who feels like their pace of learning is not quite as high as what they would like, but they're just not sure if they should take the plunge and leave to go do something else?
I find it so hard to say, right? Because it's really somebody's life that you're messing with. I get these questions from my coaches because everybody's like somehow dissatisfied. Sometimes this is normal, right? So they're also checking like, what is the normal degree dissatisfaction?
Yeah, right.
Like, till when is it okay? I can't really answer that for you, right? But the current job market is a problem in that sense, right? Like, I do not want to advise somebody to take the plunge the way I usually take plunges quite happily and then have them be unemployed for 1 or 2 years or longer. I find it very hard to say. It depends really on the person and their background and their risk appetite and their specialties and their whatnot.
It's hard.
It's really
especially
hard.
Right now.
Yeah.
The job market right now is tricky. I've seen the same thing in my coaching practice where there's folks who I look at and I think like, you're not going to have any issue finding your next gig. You have a very impressive resume and background. And I'm finding that they're just looking for longer than I feel like they should be looking, and like getting interviews and going long in the interview. And then maybe the company changes their mind at the last. I've just seen a lot of that stuff. Are you seeing that too?
A lot, like really bad. And especially for leadership roles. I think this is echoed everybody. It's really a problem. I'm also in touch with a recruitment agency. And they also told me that there are not many leadership roles out there. There's a lot of leaders looking for jobs. And even junior roles are now kind of getting cut. So there's a lot of people who are falling between the cracks a little bit. It's not great.
You know what's interesting? I'd love to get your take on this. So what I'm seeing is that companies want to hire, companies being super picky with who they hire, as they should be, because they can right now. But what I'm seeing is that, at least with startups, they're being super specific about finding folks that have already done the job, basically, that already can plug in like from day one and be successful. But I feel like the challenge is that you find people who are taking like a lateral role who take that job, and like they might not be super motivated to be in that job for the long period of time. So I'm finding this like weird misalignment where folks are like overqualified and like still barely getting the interviews, and then maybe they land in the job, but again, maybe they're a little overqualified. They've already done that job somewhere else. The company likes that, but they might not like that. It's like there's this weird misalignment. Have you seen any of that?
Yes, and also the other way around. People who would love to become individual contributors again, they have been leaders. Like me, I can work as a leader, but I also love being an IC, right? Like getting my hands dirty and doing the actual work. I'm perfectly happy that way. Maybe happier from time to time. I love solopreneurship, that you can kind of switch, right? But as a candidate, they say like, oh, they're overqualified for this role, so we assume that she is not going to be happy, and she might be totally happy, right? So and you can tell them that, but they won't believe you anyway. So that's another similar issue.
Yeah, right. And then that kind of prices out, so to speak, the folks who are at the mid-level who might be a great fit for those roles, because they're getting even more people who are applying that are more experienced, maybe looking to take less of a leadership role, more of a doer role. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's not easy right now. So that's why I'm also thinking it's very hard for me to answer these questions when people say, should I leave? I'm deeply unhappy. Should I go? And I'm like, right. So the main tip that I have, it's like, try not to conflate your identity with the job that you do, which is very hard to do when you're very passionate. And the kind of people who seek mentors or coaches are generally the people who are very passionate at doing good jobs. They're really at risk for burning out, simply put, right? And also they come to me because they want to switch to outcome-driven ways of working or more evidence-based ways of working, all of these ideals that they've heard or their CEO has referred them to me because they would like them to do that. But I try to do it very much in the context, because I'm also not saying, right, there's this theory and everyone should just apply it by the book and then it's going to be magic. It does work, but there's often a lot of disappointment about the reality of the business and of the markets, because they've all been told that all the cool companies are doing it this way and it works amazingly, which is a lie, right? So there's general disappointment in the fact that the things that we were told are not working out as well as we had hoped in the companies where we are. And then there's this sense of my identity being tied in to being successful at work. These are two pretty dangerous factors. So I try to warn people for that and say, look, it is not you, right? It is not us. It is just, it's going to be like this. And try to enjoy other stuff as well.
Yeah. Have you struggled with that in your own journey?
Of course, yeah. I had a burnout when I was 25, I think.
What is that? Are you comfortable to share? Like, what is that? What does burnout mean to you?
I was working a lot. Like, it was common for me to work like 60, 70, 80 hours. And I was also doing QA testing at night and then spending the night and staying the next day.
You would stay the night at the office?
Yes, and then continue, but really stupid, like really dumb. I had this all the stuff that is annoying about people, like just a lot of busy work and just being visible all the time and being the first one in and the last one out. I was that person very much, very unhealthy and very bad, like a very, very bad employee, right? You shouldn't want this of your people. Because I made poor decisions. I could not see the context, Like I was so flawed. I was just overtired. So I made a lot of mistakes, I think, right? I can't pinpoint them now, but a lot. I think now as an external, that I have so much more time to pause and reflect. And now that I'm not in the organization and I don't feel the pain of being in an organization, it's somehow easier for me to unpack problems and to see the bigger picture in a way that I never could before. And so back then I was like on the worst side of it, so working way too hard and also being very proud of it, like, look at me. And it's for something, I don't even know what it was anymore, right? But something that really mattered to me, I thought it was very important and it didn't work. And I think this is always the moment, right? This is the moment where your brain kind of snaps. I think there's like one specific catalyst for me that happened. And the next day I went to work, I sat down, I opened my laptop. Like, what am I doing here? Like, what do I usually do at work? Like, shit. So I opened a spreadsheet that I'd been working on the previous day. And I was like, what is this spreadsheet? Like, what was it? What am I supposed to do with this? And I went to Jira and I was like, what does any of this mean? Like, I just like, like your brain has shelves and you know which shelf to reach for. You open it and there's content. And I just couldn't find the right shelves anymore at all. So it was very scary. I felt like I really couldn't reach the content in my brain and I really drew a blank. So I just kind of got up and walked out of the office without saying anything. And I just went home and I just went to bed. Like in the morning, like at 9 o'clock in the morning, you just wow. I just like kind of got up and like walked away, kind of like dissociative. Like I'd really pushed myself too far. And then I just kind of went to bed and slept for a very long time. And I woke up and went like, oh shit, I missed like 2 days of work. Should call in sick. So I called in sick and went to a doctor and they instantly said like, you're signed off for like 2 or 3 months. Wow. Not even like a week, but they were instantly like, no, done. And that was, I learned from that, like that you shouldn't, not a good idea. And the moment must have been really scary. It was. It took me also a long time to get my brain back. I was really scared that I had broken my brain, and my brain is very important to me. It's like kind of my key asset. So it was very scary because it also didn't come back, right? For like months, I couldn't look at a screen or I couldn't consume information at all. Why do you think you pushed so hard in the beginning? You said, I wanted to be the first one in and the last one out, and I wanted to work every moment that I could. Where did those feelings come from, do you think? I think for me, and I think for a lot of, if you're really honest, it's also kind of like a persona that you try on. For me, I really liked the persona of hardworking person, like the hardest working person and the best, right? The person who knows everything about the company. Like whenever somebody would ask like, hey, what's the conversion rate for this to this? And I would just know it, right? I didn't have to run any reports because I knew everything by heart. And I liked being that person. And I also kind of liked people voicing concern sometimes, right? I kind of reveled in, this role of being this person. I think a lot of people, if they're really honest with themselves, that is an aspect maybe. And I also kind of got lost in it because at some point it was all I knew how to do. I had also eliminated a lot of friendships because all my friends were at work. So it was like my whole kind of bubble. And I know because otherwise everything would kind of implode.
Are there any conversations that happened before the day when you walked out and you felt like, hey, I just need to slow down, and then you went to the doctor and everything kind of picks up from there? Are there any like warning signs? Did anyone talk to you? Like, was there a manager of yours who was like, hey, it seems like you're working hard. We don't necessarily need you to work so hard. Like, did anyone say any of that, or did you get rewarded for the pushing?
Honestly, more the latter, to be honest. Like, I feel like looking back, also it was a weird time. It's still weird. Like another thing that we don't talk about, and I'm always very nervous to talk about it. I've never talked about it before, but I've always wanted to talk about it, is sexual harassment in the workplace, right? Because I'm sure, like for me, this was a topic and it has been a topic more than once in some shape or form. And I'm sure that for a lot of women in tech startups and scale-ups, this is a thing. And there also, I feel like there needs to be more protection, right? Also people pushing themselves too hard or people who are vulnerable. I was vulnerable in many ways. I'm much less vulnerable now, I think. Right? If I were there, I would have helped. I would have picked up on the signals and I would have talked to this person, right? There was a culture of like things that were just weird, right? And also just like rewarding each other, like zero inbox policy and you're the fastest and bro culture. Like there was just a lot of this that I think is really bad. So maybe somebody told me at some point, hey, be careful. But counter to that, 10 people congratulated me for having inbox zero all the time and being there again till 10 p.m.
This was during an era of tech where this was rewarded. So I'm not shocked to hear that because I feel like this was during an era where there was like those articles that were always flying around like, oh, this engineer sleeps on the floor of AOL.com and just has all of their meals at the company. And people used to pass that around like, oh, that's awesome.
Yes.
You're like, oh, that's so crazy. And not like, hey, that's really unhealthy and scary and maybe detrimental to our health. And probably we got it wrong, like as an industry, I feel like.
Yeah, 100%. And I was like early 20s. And very easy to influence. So I ate it all up. I gobbled it up and I embodied it.
Yeah. Wow.
So I'm glad that's changed. I feel like that's really changed a lot. And I have hopes that the sexual harassment thing has also changed. But I can't really tell because since 2020, I have been working fully remote. I haven't been in an office, so I don't really know. I just really hope that's the case. Also, I became a mother, which helps, I think. But I really hope things are improving on both those two fronts.
You've mentioned sexual harassment a couple times over the last few minutes. What does that look like for you in your journey? Either something you've seen or something you experienced firsthand.
Yeah, also something I've seen and also something I've experienced firsthand, right? So always superiors or superiors of superiors who are crossing lines and you say no, but you do it with a smile, right? Because you don't want it to get awkward or you don't, right? And then lines get crossed. So, and it's scary to report. And you also know that if you report it, nothing really will happen, right?
Well, who would you even report a sexual harassment incident to? Like if you're at an 80-person startup, there's like the one person who's in HR, maybe there's like a legal person, but like maybe they're not full-time, maybe they're like out of house. Like I don't even know who I would go to if I had like a major concern like that. Yeah,
absolutely. I had once an issue with... So this was a small one. I'm comfortable to telling that one, a small one. I had an IT admin who sent me a bunch of pictures of me that he had taken without my consent of me walking through the hallways. And he said, I was cleaning up my camera and I found
on his personal like cell phone camera or like from a surveillance system in the office.
I don't know, but he was like, look at all this I have no idea, but he's like, hey, and we were kind of friendly, right? So he somehow thought it would be a good idea to send me. It's like, hey, look at all these pictures of you that I have. And I was like, I found that weird, right? So I told him, I think this is not okay. And then I told my supervisor, because also he was like twice my age, so I told my supervisor, and they were very angry. They were like, you're totally right. This is not okay. And they went to the C-level. But one person C-level was friends with the admin, and it kind of disappeared. Nothing happened.
And so nothing happened to that person? There was nothing? Wow.
And this was just a small one, right? Like this one didn't really hurt, but it's like a small example of how these things go in reality. And then you also know next time something happens, why report it at all, right?
60% of the listeners to this show are women. What do you want them to hear?
I don't know. I'm like, because like it's not like I cracked it. To be honest, in many cases I left, right? I just kind of escaped the whole situation. I'm more like women who are more, because you're less vulnerable, I feel, when you're in a more senior role, for sure. So for the ones of ours who are in a more senior role, to just keep an eye on the people on the younger women, or even men, but on the younger people who are like an obvious potential victim for these things, like keep an eye and look at what is happening and check in with them to see if there's something you could help with. That's what I would do if I were internal in a company. Now as a coach, I can check for these things, right? But I'm not there watching. But if I were watching, I would keep an eye on it.
When I was in-house at a few of my last stops, there were specific Slack channels and like support groups for women to lift each other up within the company and support each other. And I assume to report things as well if there's things to report. And that's one of the things that I worry about with maybe like the shift away from a lot of the DEI and inclusion stuff is like if that gets lost or if that changes. And again, I'm not in-house, so I don't know, but that's something that your story makes me think about.
It's absolutely awful.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, right? So I know that you're sharing a safe story, and that safe story feels maybe not so safe to me. And I'm sure that there's other things that you don't want to share that I'm not going to ask you to share that maybe feel a little less safe. If there's anyone who listens to this who wants to talk to you privately, where should they go, or could they go to you? And if so, where should they go? Please
go to me. And I would do that, of course, free of charge, right? Like we could chat. It would not be a consulting hour. I would just be happy to listen. And you can find me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the easiest place to reach me. You can connect, send a note. Please do. I don't know if I can help, but I can at least listen.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot earlier when I said, what do you want women to hear who might be listening to this? Not thinking that you necessarily had the answer, but maybe just normalizing some of the realities so that they don't feel alone or like it's their fault or any of those things, right? I'm putting words in your mouth or in their mouths, but that was just where my head went as I asked that question, not looking at you as the definitive source of answers.
This is what you should do. No, exactly. Right. But I think it is important. Like I've never spoken about it ever, or like never on air, because it makes me very nervous. But I think it is important, right? Because I think a lot of people are in this situation probably right now, and they will. Just to know that this does happen, unfortunately, and for leaders to maybe keep an eye out.
Hey, if you're enjoying the stories on this show and feeling like you're ready to tackle some of your own hurdles, I'm here to help. If you didn't know already, I offer one-to-one coaching specifically for people who work on or around growth teams who want to have a bigger influence and impact in their roles. Maybe you're navigating some tough moments, whether it's managing your team or handling feedback. Maybe you just want to step into a bigger leadership role. Or maybe you're at a unicorn company today and you want to make sure that the company doesn't outgrow your skill set. Either way, I can help. If you're interested in learning a little bit more, head to deliveringvalue.co/coaching to learn a little bit more and set up a call with me to see if we jive. All right, enough from me. Back to the episode. So going back to your burnout story for a second, I just wanted to talk about what changes for you after that moment. So you said, I had this moment, I had to go home, I left the office. And for listeners of this show who may have listened, I interviewed Brian Balfour, he's the CEO of Reforge, and he actually told almost the same sentences that you shared. He described his burnout as like one day he sat down at his computer and he was like, I think my brain is broken. And he was like, I think I need to shut my computer. And he took a few months off to recharge. So for any listeners of this show and for any folks who might have struggled with this or be silently struggling, like there's a lot of people who have worked through this and there's great support systems. And And I appreciate you sharing that. So what changes for you after that? So you have this moment. Do you go back to the same company?
No.
Okay.
And I think probably most people don't. I'm guessing. I haven't seen the statistics, but I'm guessing most people don't. So it took me about 3 months to recover, which is actually not long considering, right? So, and then a lot changed. So I definitely went somewhere else, and I still care about my work, right? I'm still very passionate, but my identity isn't my work. And there are much clearer boundaries. And this helps a lot. I think also this makes me much better at my work, right? I'm much easier. I can pull the things apart. And also that helps when you get negative feedback, which you always do, right? You will always get feedback. It isn't about me. I can extract that much better. So I feel like since then, I have not had a burnout, and I also have not really felt at risk of having a burnout. I felt like it's been much easier for me to have those boundaries.
And are there any habits or rituals that you've either built in consciously or maybe subconsciously, as I asked the question, that help with that, help with you not tying too much of your personal identity to your professional wins or losses or misses or whatever? Because I feel like that's easy to, it's like, It makes sense when you say it, right? Logically, your brain's like, yes, we have this new thing. And then like, you know, like anything that you pay attention to in life, you think about other things, and then maybe you're at risk for it popping up again. So I'm curious if there are things that you've built into your life to help with that.
I think it is who I surround myself with. I am extremely picky at who I work with, because in the end, who you work with, who you surround yourself with is kind of who you become. So since then, I have picked environments that do not applaud you for doing this stuff, right? That embody these values or these ways of working that actually make way more sense to me. So for example, there was another company where I worked for about 3.5 years, where I was also extremely passionate about what I did and also happily worked over hours, right? It was a similar context, but there I had a very good relationship with somebody and we supported each other, right? So when we saw, okay, the other person is kind of spinning out, we say, hey, let's go for a walk. So we would just help each other out. So I think when I look for a new job, I don't really care about the industry or the products or even the value prop all that much, because in a startup anyway, it all changes. I care about the people, right? The team. And that's why I'm a big fan of doing consulting, for example, because before I would work somewhere permanently, if I ever did that, I would first work for them on a consulting basis, so I can actually work with these people and see who are they really, which you can't really get from an interview. And so I care way more about the environment that I choose for myself and the people.
And what are you listening for? I'm assuming that probably a lot of this is like intuitive, like you can kind of feel it out, just like with the example that you shared. Like, you know, if I'm going to work with a company, I want to work with people who help look out for each other and lift each other up. But I'm curious, like in the back of your head, if there's like a rubric, almost in the same way that when you interview a candidate, right? It's like, here's the 6 things that we care about in order of priority. It's sort of like maybe what are a few of those in your head as you think about that?
It's generally how people work together, right? Like generally, is there like an atmosphere of sharing knowledge? Is there like an atmosphere of helping each other, supporting each other, growing together, right? You get a feel for that quite quickly. And one thing, like a story I can share, is like one company, the last company I worked for before I became a solopreneur, it was a great environment. I really liked the CEO. I got a lot of really good lessons from him. And he was the kind of person who would really put in a lot of effort in empowering his people and supporting his people to do their best work, right? To kind of help them grow their strength. And I asked him for feedback because I noticed somehow that it wasn't working, what I was doing. I had worked at this other startup before, which was not the best environment. It was kind of very bro culture, a lot of talking over each other, a lot of like, yeah, let's do this. Let's put the pedal to the metal. That was like something they like to shout, and it was like, woohoo.
Oh, I thought you were using hyperbole. They actually shouted that. Nice.
They actually said that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like there was a lot of like circle back offline. Like it was a lot of this, which can be fine, but it was not fine. It was very much this kind of culture. But I got a bit lazy because I had a baby, and I was like, fuck it. Like they'll pay me, it's fine. But I picked up all of these negative habits because I was there, right? And you become who you surround yourself with. So I had all these negative habits of talking over people, which I still do a bit. It's one of my defaults I have to really pay attention to, talking over people. But also I always assumed that the people around me don't care as much as I do. I had been the smartest person in the room, sounds horrible to say that about yourself, but the most prepared person in the room for a very long time. So I always prepared everything. I was used to just saying, okay, we need to do this, instead of inviting people into co-create, because they won't do that anyway. They don't want to collaborate. They're off on their own hike. So I'm just going to do this as an island, and then I'm going to tell them what I did and how we're going to do it, because that was the only way that it kind of worked in that environment. And I took these ways of working into my new company, which was totally different. The people were very smart and very motivated and very outcome driven and very collaborative, like totally different environment. But I came in with my old style, because it was the thing that I had learned how to do. So I came in with like, here is the product strategy in 10 slides. I will explain to you the product strategy, and now we're going to execute it. And I noticed like it's not landing, right? Or there's not much happening. There's not much questions. It felt off. So I asked the CEO for feedback. Like, what is it that I'm doing wrong? And he was explaining this to me, right? So he gave me really useful feedback. And I think that's the marker that I'm looking for. Like, one of the first times that I actually got extremely useful feedback, I asked him for something. He said, ask me up front, and then I'm going to think about it. And then I'm going to give you my best feedback. And it was just mind-blowing, because he told me all of these things, like, you are over-prepared. You are not allowing people to co-create with you. They want to be in the process with you. You are doing X, right? You are interrupting people. So he told me like all this kind of stuff that I needed to hear, and it was extremely helpful. And then for me, it was like, I love this place because now I can learn.
So what's really interesting about that is all of us pick up habits and defaults and things that we need to do to survive and maybe thrive in certain environments. And then we go to other environments where those skills impact us in different ways, some positive, some negative. So for folks who are listening to this, who are hopefully finding new gigs and maybe trying to set up, how can they shortcut that process of figuring out, do I need to reprogram a little bit for this new environment? How can they get there faster? Any tips?
I think like one learning that I had, like in the beginning, I always thought, when I start at a job, I need to show as much of myself as possible. I need to be very visible because it sets a tone. Right? If they see me like, wow, she's contributing so much, she's so visible, she's producing so much, they will like anchor me like that forever. And then I could coast a little bit later, right? Because I'm anchored as this person.
This is like my whole high school, by the way. I used to crush it first month, and then I would just coast on that for the rest of the year.
Right?
I love
but
that.
This is like a normal instinct. It's like what we do.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
But it's actually really, really dumb if you do this, right? Because you're already putting yourself out there as person X, but you have no idea whether that person X matches with society Y, right? Because it's a little society. And so you've also, without understanding at all what that society is, done that. So I now try to be much quieter and listen, right? It's like so obvious, and it's what we do with customer discovery, but I listen. So I have one-on-ones with everyone who wants to share their time with me also, right? I wouldn't just grab it off their calendar, but I'll ask like, I would love to have a one-on-one with you. Do you have time? Does it make sense? Would you like to? And then I just try to listen and try to piece the whole thing together to understand which of my strengths I can use and which not, right? Like how I should kind of modify myself. You can't be the same person in every setting. You just can't.
Does that take more courage?
I don't know. Like it takes some self-reflection, I think, and maybe confidence, not ego. To be like, you are not your behavior, you are not your traits, right? The core is something else, I think.
I ask because as I reflect, anytime I've gone into a new place, I always go in with this bravado that's like, oh, I got to prove I'm right? I interviewed better than the other people that they could have hired. I want to prove them right. I want to show up and just what you said, I want to really set the tone and show up and like make my stamp instantly. And I kind of want to set the tone with my coworkers that like, I'm an A player. Yeah. This is me projecting a little bit. And so to go in and listen goes against like every instinct in my being.
Exactly. But I think it's better. I'll tell you how it goes. I don't know yet, right? I've just been doing this for a while. I do think it's better, but it might not always be better. But exactly, I did the same as what you described, exactly that.
So Elsa, what is something that you wish more leaders were honest about, right? So we're talking about all these different things. Actually, it's a great segue from what we were just chatting about and showing up and thinking and doing more listening and things like that. What's something that you wish more leaders were honest about?
I think about our own shortcomings, right? About our own blind spots, the things that we don't know. I feel like a lot of leaders feel pressured into having like a poker face, right? To know all the answers, because otherwise you look weak. You don't want to look weak. But actually, it's fine to look a bit weak, right? Like, and this also depends on the environment. You might have a lot of people around who get really nervous when you say you don't know. But that's not ideal, right? You want to create an environment where saying I don't know is applauded from time to time, right? Like it's embraced, because we don't know most of the time. This is just the reality. So I think we need a lot more of, I don't know, I need to think about it. Let me put in the research and get back to you, or we are just not ready to make a decision. I think me, in the past, I had this incessant need to make decisions on the spot so we wouldn't be slow. And you do need to move fast as a startup, yes, but I made so many knee-jerk decisions, and I heard other leadership people on the leadership team make really random decisions of like, okay, let's do that, just for the sake of, like, look at me being decisive. No.
And how about a mindset or a habit or a ritual that's had a massive impact on your career, either like your career happiness or your career growth or some of the outcomes? What comes to mind for you? For me,
taking breaks. Right, which I never did in the beginning. I was just always glued to the computer, and I was like, I have to, because taking breaks is not cool. And now I take so many breaks. Take breaks all the time, and I do my best thinking during breaks. Right, I feel for sure that I'm not there yet, right? But I'm getting better at seeing the bigger picture and seeing the larger context at things. And I think that's where the value is, right? It's like this Pareto effect, like 80-20 rule, and I think I want to unlock that part, right? And I think you do that sometimes by stepping away. And what has helped me a lot is kids, because they force me to step away. And there's like these moments, like it used to be in the shower that ideas came. And now my almost 5-year-old makes me sit next to him while he falls asleep. I don't have to be in the bed, but I have to sit next to him in a chair. And I just sit and I think, right? I'm not at a computer and I can't act. Like I can't start typing, I can't start researching. I'm just sitting there with my own head. And so many things come to me when I do that, I found. So taking breaks.
That's really cool. Are you into, like, have you ever been into like mindfulness or meditation or anything like that?
No, but I've wanted to. It's just, I'm very bad at it. And then somebody told me you can't be bad at it. Then
I was going to say, I don't think that's, I agree with that statement. Yeah,
my mind just drifts. Like my mind does go a million mind. I think what I understood before is that the point is that you slow down your minds. But I kind of like how fast my mind goes in a lot of different avenues. Right? I don't mind. I don't hate it. So I've tried it, but I think I do other things that are almost meditative. Right? Like, which is like just sitting in silence and thinking. It might not be meditation, but maybe it's close. I'm not sure.
I think it's very close. I'll give you my 10 cents on this. I think it's called practice for a reason, which is it's the practicing of refocusing your mind when it wanders away from what you want it to focus on. And so like there's a million different types of meditation. I am out of practice for what it's worth. I went through maybe a 2-year period where I meditated most days. And then it's been maybe 5 years since that period of time. But it's like the thoughts are swirling around. And some days you just lean into the thoughts and you're like, well, I kind of like this thought. And so anyways, that's why I was curious, because that sounds like that's the space that you get with your son at night. And that's cool that you spend it and you get breakthroughs that way. That's awesome.
Yeah, it really works. And also, like you have more context switches. Like you have to leave the office to go to the playground. And it's nice. It's like a nice reset, right? And then you put your kid to bed and maybe you do another hour, right? And it just kind of, it's context switching is bad for productivity, but it's somehow, for me, also kind of good for my productivity or for my creativity.
What do you think you'll do? Because like everything in parenting, there will be a time where suddenly one day your son doesn't want you to do that, or mom, get out of the room now. Like that'll probably just be suddenly with no warning. When that happens, what will you replace that thinking time with?
I'll just be deeply depressed and cry all day.
Oh, no. This is sad, Mom.
No, I don't know. I hope that I will have taken away the value of having that and finding different spaces to do that. I really hope I have the strength to enforce that. But I've gotten so much out of it, so I really believe that I will just put myself in a room and think with no computer, so I can't take actions.
You know what I love, what I think is so beautiful about that? As a parent who's got a kid basically the same age, I think I would look at that moment with like anger and resentment and be like, God damn it, I don't want to sit here. I've been with you all day. Like, I know myself well enough to know that I would have some version of that. So I think it's really beautiful that you've worked that. I don't know if you felt any of that, but you don't have that and you fill it with something else.
I mean, of course I did, right? There's like some days you're like super empathic and other days you're like totally impatient and you were like, oh, I'm a horrible parent. It's like, but generally this has been an unlock for me. And like, it's like, I don't do it when I'm supposed to be interacting with my child, that I'm really there. But this moment he needs me to just sit there, right? So he's just falling asleep next to me. So it's a perfect time to do that.
And because I know your family's waiting for you to come back to them, tell us what you want the listeners to hear that maybe you just haven't said directly to them yet. Anything that hasn't been said?
So something totally off topic, what we haven't discussed yet, but something that's been on my mind a lot because I've been really deep diving into AI. And I think like everybody's really excited and really terrified at the same time. And I think your podcast is also very much directed at leaders, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So addressing the leaders, don't make people scared. I think there's like all this fear mongering around and there's these horrible things being written about like, if you are not amazing at AI, we're going to fire you. And we're like, stop, please stop, right? Like nobody, they're not going to do their best work or make great decisions under this kind of coercion and pressure and fear, right? Please don't do that. So that's one. Second side, like I've been working with AI quite a lot. And my takeaway so far is that, you still need a human brain, right? It's an excellent sparring partner, but if you are good at thinking deeply about who your customer is and what their problems are, like really using all that emotional background and all that context that you have as a human and real cognitive understanding, then you won't be replaced anytime soon.
And are you creating services around AI? I know you've been doing a lot of research and like experimenting in your own like personal time.
I am not, because I feel like I'm just playing with it, right? Like I would hate to position myself as like the Gen AI expert because I am not. But
it's like even the people who are positioning themselves that way, I think they're still just playing.
I know,
like,
but
there is no definitive source.
I don't want to go down to that level because there's so many things I could do to do better. But I really think in the end, it pays off to just be honest and authentic. Just be a real person. Don't pretend to be anything you're not. So even in my LinkedIn bio, I call myself, I think, a discovery enthusiast. But I would never, I can't call myself an expert, and definitely not when it comes to AI tooling. Like I know a thing or two that I've picked up that I think kind of works for me, and I'm happy to share that. But that's pretty much it.
And if folks want to hire you for the thing that you know a thing or two about, where should they go? How can they learn more about working with you? Where should we send them? We'll put links to everything in the notes below. Yeah,
so 2 places. First is LinkedIn, where you can talk to me. And the other one is Substack. Substack has my long form content. And I think it's really great if you want to really see what happens in my head and really see how I work. Like I really outline step by step exactly the things I do. And then you can see whether that's a match for you or not. And maybe it helps.
Well, it'll definitely help. I'm a subscriber. I'm a reader. It's all good stuff. Thank you for coming on and sharing your story and some of the game and some of the mistakes that you've made. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I had a really great time. This was a really nice, though a little bit scary conversation, but really nice.
I have heard that from other folks. I try to make like a safe space to talk about the hard stuff, but I understand.
But you did a really good job. I went places where I haven't gone before, so I appreciate it.